Da Vinci's painting has been on the convent wall for almost 500 years, or about 500 years, in spite of the fact that the dining hall was used as a refectory as it was intended. At some point, 2 doors were cut in the wall, and hence through the mural too. It must have been an everyday thing for those who lived at the Santa Maria convent in Milan. All the residents had dinner with Jesus and with his friends every evening. Imagine thinking every night as you sit down to a meal that this is the last night that Jesus will walk the earth, the night in which Jesus gave himself up for us, the last night before the crucifixion, the night when Jesus sat at table with his disciples. Now, this painting by Da Vinci, the disciples didn't sit at a table to pose, but they were reenacting an ancient picture. The disciples were celebrating a time of deliverance when God saved the people through Moses, who was a deliverer sent by God to lead them out of bondage into freedom. If I were writing a play about this 3 days that begins with Maundy Thursday and goes through Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then Easter Sunday, I think the scenes would be: Scene 1, Jesus sits at a table with his friends. Scene 2, betrayal, arrest, trial. Now, there would be various locations, so I don't know if we'd call those mini scenes in between. There's a lot of detail included in the scriptures there, the main point of which, in my mind, is to show that the things that Jesus goes through are extremely human things. Things like betrayal, false accusations, unfair trials, systems that don't work for all the people, crowd mentalities, mocking, beating, even being spit upon, looked down upon. Scene 3 would be the cross. Scene 4 would be a tomb for burial. And then there would be an intermission of about 2 days. And on the 3rd day after the intermission, the scene would resume, also at the tomb. But now the stone is rolled away and the tomb is empty. That would be scene 5. And then scene 6, we'd be back to meeting disciples at table, because that's where Jesus met them. My point is, the table is the location for both the opening and the closing scene. The table is the place where the disciples meet Jesus again on the first week after the resurrection, and they return again and meet him at table in the same upper room. Other disciples meet him at table at Emmaus. The table is important. Disciples, even today, meet him at the table. As far as we know, the disciples never returned to the cross. And why would they? I can't see Jesus taking folks on field trips to the site of his execution. The risen Christ never gathers his followers at Calvary and points it out to him, saying, "This is where I and many others were executed by the state for the sake of keeping the peace in the empire and keeping the power in Rome." No. Jesus, the Prince of Peace, the one whose greatest gift to us is peace, peace like the world cannot give. Jesus never seems to preach about the events of Good Friday. For all of our religious traditions around the importance of Holy Week and Maundy Thursday and Good Friday, Jesus never even mentions Good Friday. When Jesus returns and visits with his disciples after the resurrection, the disciple Thomas can touch his hands and his side and see his wounds. They somehow remain. How Jesus got those wounds isn't a part of the recorded discussion. how Jesus is healed enough so that he can walk and talk and live, and yet cannot be held on to, for he has not yet risen to the Father. I wish that part were explained, but it isn't. Instead of explanations of how, the biblical record again and again gives us stories and examples of why. Almost all of the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus are joyful, celebratory, conversational, and take place around a table at a meal. Drawing on the writings of Diana Butler Bass, I invite you to think about this table tonight and to think about Maundy Thursday today as perhaps the most significant day of Holy Week. Now, I know it'd be harder to wear little tables around our neck than crosses, but I want you to think about ways in which the table is the main point. Jesus' own emphasis seems to be on hospitality and table fellowship, on friendship and connection, rather than focusing on the powers of empire and who can destroy who and how fast. Every Holy Week, as we move toward Good Friday, this service on Maundy Thursday begins one long service. Tonight, we won't have a benediction and ascending forth, for hopefully we'll be back tomorrow for Good Friday. And as the service continues, again, you'll be sent out without a benediction to return on Easter Sunday, because the story doesn't end before then. Every Holy Week is kind of like a play with a long intermission that doesn't conclude until resurrection morning. In fact, if we want to be particular about it, Easter doesn't conclude for a great 50 days. It goes on for longer than Lent did. What if Maundy Thursday, this Passover day, this day of God's liberation and friendship and food and plenty, what if the feast is the main event? Those first disciples, they didn't know about Good Friday or a cross or a blood sacrifice to end the sacrificial system or to satisfy God's need for a propitiation or to show the end of scapegoating. No, those disciples were celebrating the Passover, that God had delivered them in the past, and that was wonderful. They were in Jerusalem with friends and family at a big, bustling holiday meal that remembered God had freed their ancestors from slavery, and they had freedom, and they should enjoy it. Passover is filled with political expectations and possibilities, and sitting at the Passover meal, the disciples must have wondered, would God likewise free them from the powers of empire, all that was Rome? Would the kingdom that Jesus promised truly be at hand? As they thought about their past history and their present dilemmas, the disciples enjoyed a holy moment of feasting, dinner with Jesus. As a college chaplain, a large percentage of my chaplaincy budget was food. The justification for it was always well argued because of different events and what the outcomes the students would receive would be. But it comes down to this: Jesus loved meals. He shared many with the most unlikely table partners. We need to be ready to welcome to the table anyone Jesus would welcome to the table. That doesn't put very many restrictions on it. Jesus spent so much time at table with people, you might be able to think of his work as organizing suppers, as a way of embodying the coming of the kingdom of God, as a table where all are welcome, and a table where there's enough for all. With the confirmands on their confirmation retreat, we had a scavenger hunt, an Easter egg hunt, actually, even though it was still in Lent. It was in this very room. There were little eggs hidden all around. I don't know if we got all of them. You may still be finding some of them. They were plastic, the kind filled with jelly beans. But the important part is we told the students that suddenly their elbows had become stiff. They could pick up jelly beans, they could pick up eggs, but they couldn't get them into their own basket. They had to put them into someone else's basket. After the hunt, as they were eating their candy, I told them a story. Supposedly an old rabbi told this story about the difference between heaven and hell. He was taken to see a vision of hell, and he saw a bounteous table full of the best foods, the most sumptuous feast. But all around the table, the people looked sullen and dehydrated, and they were starving, for their arms couldn't bend, and they had only long spoons, and so they could dip into the bowl, but they couldn't get anything to their mouth. After this vision of horror, the rabbi says he was taken to see a vision of heaven, and surprised to see that a table there was stretched long and filled with an equally sumptuous feast. And the people around that table as well also had arms without elbows and really long spoons. But they had learned during their time in this life that joy comes when we feed one another. What if Maundy Thursday was truly that last supper of the old regime, the last supper that we celebrate under the powers of empire, the first feast of a new creation, a coming kingdom of God, where our community is Christ's community, is one of mutual service and equality, reciprocity, abundance, generosity, and lots of shared good food. What if this night is the final night of the old way of life and the eve of the new life that Jesus invites us into when he says, I no longer call you servants, for servants don't know what their master is doing. But I have told you the key to the kingdom. It's a new commandment. Love one another. Love one another. Let's eat.